being with us today here at the North Carolina Chamber. My name is Lou Ebert. I'm CEO of the North Carolina Chamber, and we're pleased to have you here today to talk about an important part of our economy that will have long-term implications on our ability to grow and be competitive. There are currently more than 10 million people living in our state, and by 2030 we predict there'll be as many as 12 million. By then we'll be the 7th largest state in America. As we prepare for growth, the North Carolina Chamber about 4 years ago launched a long-term strategy, Vision 2030, to grow the economy, to make sure North Carolina is thinking about the big things we need to focus on, to be sure that by 2030, as our economy grows, we can create 1 million new jobs and be in the best position to grow and compete for economic activity. That vision focused on 4 big areas, one of which we'll talk about today. One of the areas includes education and talent. So as we think about the future, investments in that area matter. The second area focuses on the need to be economically competitive, so the cost of doing business must stay competitive. The third area focuses on entrepreneurship and innovation. And the final area we'll touch on today is infrastructure. So you think about what happens to areas like this, that by 2030 will double in population. So we'll go from roughly 1 million to 2 million in less than 15 years. So as North Carolina prepares for rapid economic growth, we want to be in the best position to not only accelerate job creation, but make sure we can secure North Carolina's future. Today we have important information that you're here to hear about, and thanks for taking time to be with us. We're pleased to have 2 important organizations in addition to our organization that are very actively involved in making sure constituents, voters, politicians understand the need to continue to invest. We'll hear first from TRIP, which is the Road Information Program, a leading national organization in this space. And we'll also hear from RTA, the Regional Transportation Association, talking about activity happening right here in the Triangle. So it's a pleasure first to welcome Carolyn Boniface Kelly. She is the Associate Director of Research and Communication. She prepares studies just like this for all states in America, looking at surface transportation issues, including road, bridge conditions, traffic congestion, highway safety, and economic development. She's here today to share that data with you and obviously answer any questions you might have. So we're delighted to have Carolyn with us here in North Carolina as part of her 4-city roadshow to announce this important data in North Carolina. So Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you all for joining us this morning. As he said, my name is Carolyn Boniface Kelly. I'm the Associate Director of Research and Communication for TRIP, and also one of the authors of the report that's being released today. Before I get to the findings of the report, let me first explain a little bit about who TRIP is and what we do. TRIP is a national nonprofit transportation research group based in Washington, D.C. We produce both state-specific reports like this one, as well as nationwide reports that examine road and bridge conditions, traffic safety, congestion, and economic development, as well as highway funding. The findings of our report are often cited by major media outlets as well as legislative bodies as they consider how to best fund their transportation systems. Since TRIP was founded almost 50 years ago, we've produced more than 500 reports in all 50 states. With that said, let me turn to some of the findings of the TRIP report that we're releasing today. It finds that North Carolina's transportation network is truly the backbone of the state. The state's roads carry more than $700 billion in goods in and out of the state, and they carry the state's more than 7 million licensed drivers as well as those passing through. These roads carry 115 billion vehicle miles of travel each year, but because of the increased load that they're asked to carry and the work that they're asked to do, many of the state's roads are increasingly deteriorated and congested, and the funding is simply not available to make all of the needed repairs. North Carolina has seen explosive growth since 2000 in population and vehicle travel, which has placed even greater stress on the state's transportation system. And North Carolina has taken steps to address the needs of the transportation system and to accommodate that sharp rise in population and vehicle growth and economic growth, most notably with a modest increase in state and federal funding that was approved in 2015. But despite these steps, over the next decade, the North Carolina DOT estimates that they'll only have funding available for 17% of needed projects throughout the state. That leaves nearly 4 out of every stranded on the drawing board and unable to proceed because the funds are not available. The North Carolina DOT estimates that currently there's a $600 million gap each year in between the amount of funding that they're able to spend and the amount that would be required to spend to keep the state's transportation system smooth, safe, and operating efficiently. Because of that lack of investment, the state's drivers are traveling on a system that's increasingly deteriorated, congested, and that lacks some of the safety features that we would like to see on the roads. According to the TRIP report, statewide, 44% of major urban roads are in either poor or mediocre condition. Here in the Raleigh-Durham area, 33%, so 1 out of every 3 miles that you drive on, is in either poor or mediocre condition. Delaying the repairs to these roads is much more costly than investing the money to fix them today. In fact, every $1 in deferred maintenance leads to $4 or $5 in future costs to make the needed repairs to those roads. The state's bridges are also showing signs of their age. In fact, across North Carolina, 10% of state-maintained and locally maintained bridges are structurally deficient. That means that there's significant deterioration to the major components of the bridge. Here in the Raleigh-Durham area, 5% of bridges are structurally deficient. Now, it's important to note that those bridges are safe for travel and that they're maintained and monitored on a regular basis by the organizations that are responsible for their upkeep. But many of them do need significant repairs or even replacement in some cases. The TRIP report also looked at congestion on the state's roads. Because in recent decades, the rate of travel increase and population increase have far outpaced the expansion of the state's transportation system. As a result, drivers are spending more and more time stuck in congestion and staring at the brake lights ahead of them rather than getting to their destination. In fact, here in the Raleigh area, the average driver loses 31 hours each year stuck in traffic congestion. And cumulatively, the area's drivers waste over 9 billion gallons of fuel each year because of traffic congestion. Our report also looked at highway safety in the state. We found that nearly 6,700 people lost their lives on North Carolina's roads in the last 5 years. Some of those crashes and fatalities perhaps could have been prevented had there been additional safety features present on these roads. The state's overall traffic fatality rate is significantly higher than the national average, and North Carolina's rural roads are particularly deadly. They've got a traffic fatality rate that's more than 4 times higher than the fatality rate on all other roads in the state. Despite some of the deficiencies that we note in the TRIP report, it's important to note that these deteriorated roads and bridges and the condition of the transportation system is not at all a reflection of the abilities or the capabilities of the state DOT or the local municipalities. In fact, they're doing a tremendous job with the funds they have available. But the reality is there's simply not enough transportation funding to make the needed improvements to keep the state's transportation system safe, smooth, and flowing efficiently. Unless North Carolina can increase transportation funding at the local, state, and federal levels, drivers are in for an even rougher road, and they'll face even more taillights in front of them as they try to go about their business each day, and they'll have a transportation system that's potentially not as safe as it could be. Increasing investment in North Carolina's network of roads and bridges is vital to boosting the state's economy and allowing the state to keep its competitive edge. In the short term, this transportation investment creates good jobs, and in the long term, it leaves behind a lasting asset for future generations and for the state's residents and communities. Without adequate transportation funding, North Carolina and the nation will lose their competitive edge, and the state's transportation system will become increasingly deteriorated and gridlocked. So that covers the findings of the TRIP report. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Lou.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Just a few comments, and I'll introduce Joe Milazzo to talk about what he sees here in the regional area. But I think, first of all, I want to thank Carolyn for her group providing important data to understand what's happening in our economy around infrastructure as it impacts economic activity, as it impacts job growth, and more importantly, as it impacts safety. I think certainly as an area that will see dramatic and increased growth, I think we want to be mindful that there's long-term investments that states like North Carolina have to make to be sure that the kind of future we envision for our state happens. It's also encouraging to see that in this state, probably unlike many, we aren't waiting for Washington to figure out what might happen in that area. You might recall a year and a half ago, we were able to organize a statewide campaign called North Carolina Can't Afford to Wait, and help to send that message to the legislature in a way that was meaningful and productive. It produced about $1.2 billion of biennium recurring funding for infrastructure in North Carolina. So as you travel the state right now, you're seeing projects that are now getting done quicker. There's more road building activity. There's more funds available at DOT to do more projects. But I think even as Carolyn study surfaces, for a state like ours that's the 4th fastest growing, this is the 28th largest economy in the world, we have to be sure that we're making smart investments that position us well for the future. So clearly, as we see this kind of investment, it's our chicken versus the egg problem. There's places like Atlanta and Austin that have chosen not to make smart investments, and if you're stuck in traffic in those cities, good luck. Our goal is to make sure we're not one of those cities. And here to talk about that is Joe Milazzo. Joe is really the leading advocate for this kind of investment being made here in the Triangle as Executive Director of the Regional Transportation Alliance. And Joe, I'll let you add some comments. Welcome.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to connect a little bit more about transportation and the importance in this market. I want to say some thank yous to TRIP for the research you're doing, to the North Carolina Chamber for continuing to lead at the state level for the work on how important transportation is to commerce. As the leader of the business group for transportation in this market, we've been focused on this for 15 years, in fact, and making sure the investments in freeways, in transit, and air service get done and will continue to get done. As Lou said, North Carolina has been a leader in being progressive and smart in terms of the investments that need to be made. We have, from 1989, with the creation of the Highway Trust Fund, to 2013 with the data-driven Strategic Transportation Investments Rule, to 2015 with the new access to user fee-based approach for transportation, which is essential because as new electric vehicles come into play, the motor fuels tax is becoming less and less viable as a funding source, but we're going to need it. Our market is growing, our state is growing. North Carolina was just named top 3 state by CEO magazine. We were named the top state in terms of economic development, won the Prosperity Cup this year. It tells us something we already know. The TRIP report tells us something we already know. We've got to keep our eye on the ball. One thing we don't want to do for the Triangle here is to be on the wrong end of a word association game. When people say Atlanta, the first thing they think of is typically not the Braves or the World of Coca-Cola. Unfortunately, it's traffic. When people think of the Triangle, Raleigh-Durham, they don't think of traffic. They think of growth, they think of prosperity, they think of innovation. We'd like to keep it that way. So I want to say, as we go forward with our top 3 priorities as the Regional Transportation Alliance Business Coalition, accelerating 540 in Southern Boyd County is our top priority, and then making sure that RDU has enough money for its airport. The most important piece of infrastructure in this region is I-40, but the second most important might well be runway 5L 23R to make sure there's funding for that. And the third one is a low-cost funding solution to accelerate some of those lower-cost turn lane projects and make a big difference in people's lives. So I want to say thank you again to Lou and the North Carolina Chamber. We have got to keep our eye on the ball. The North Carolina legislature's investments, the governor's investments over successive governors have been great and purposeful, but with the growth that's here and more on the way, we have got to keep moving. So let's get moving.